Before we begin, take a moment. If you find this story interesting, leave a comment with the number 1 and subscribe to support me. But if it's not quite your style, comment with the number 2 so I can improve and do better next time. Your feedback is my greatest motivation. Life often presents unforeseen circumstances. I have a narrative that I haven't disclosed to many, as it is intricate. Have you ever experienced the sensation of traversing a precarious boundary between right and wrong, not out of desire but due to life circumstances? That was my sentiment on that particular day, as if the universe possessed a perverse sense of humor and I was the subject of its jest. It all commenced on an unremarkable Saturday afternoon. I was engaged in nothing extraordinary during a leisurely weekend, tackling some household chores accompanied only by the soft hum of the dryer. While sorting through my closet to determine items for donation, I discovered an old miniskirt. Although I no longer wear such garments, I believed I had outgrown that phase. However, as I held the skirt, memories surged forth. It was a vestige of my youth, a time when confidence was innate and life revolved around enjoyment and liberation. On a whim, I decided to try it on. I had low expectations, but when gazing into the mirror, I couldn't suppress a giggle at how the garment clung to me more snugly than I recalled, accentuating areas I hadn't focused on in years. I was simply experimenting when I heard a tap at the door. Who could it be? I muttered to myself. My hair was disheveled, and I wasn't dressed to make an impression. Nor was I anticipating anyone's arrival. When I answered the door, my nephew Jason stood there. He was no longer a child. At 22, he had matured. Exuding confidence with broad shoulders and a friendly demeanor. He carried a bag of tools and wore his usual casual smile. "Auntie, you called regarding the leaky faucet," he said. I realized I had completely forgotten to ask him to come by and repair the sink in the guest bathroom. Although I felt somewhat self-conscious about my attire, I chose to laugh it off. "Indeed. Please come in. The bathroom is down the hall." Jason walked past me, and I noticed his brief hesitation, his gaze flickering toward me before he swiftly averted it. Perhaps it was my imagination. But there was an unusual atmosphere. Jason commenced his work while I returned to my closet, but throughout, I sensed an odd tension, neither negative nor anticipated. At one point, Jason called out, "Hey Auntie, may you come here briefly? I believe I require assistance." Upon entering the bathroom, I found Jason crouched with his sleeves rolled up, exposing his tanned arms. He held a wrench in one hand and gestured toward the faucet. "I believe the pipe is stuck. Can you hold this while I attempt to loosen it?" Nodding, I leaned in to grasp the faucet. The small bathroom meant our shoulders brushed occasionally, but I endeavored to disregard the closeness. Jason's focus seemed split between the task and something else. "Everything okay?" I asked to break the silence. Jason smiled his usual relaxed smile. "Yeah, you're the expert, right?" After a few minutes, he released the pipe and stood, dusting his hands. "All done. It should be as good as new." "Thank you," I replied, aiming for nonchalance. Jason leaned against the counter, regarding me thoughtfully. "I don't believe I've ever seen you in attire like that." I froze momentarily. "Oh, this? Just something I found in the back of my closet." I laughed awkwardly, pulling at the hem of the skirt. Jason's gaze lingered briefly before he smiled. "It suits you." Feeling self-conscious, I thanked him quickly and stepped out of the bathroom. Jason followed. "Auntie," he said, stopping me in the hallway. I turned, heart pounding. "Yeah." He hesitated. "You ever feel like things happen for a reason?" "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. Jason opened his mouth to elaborate but then laughed. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." That night, while flipping through channels, my phone buzzed. It was Jason. "Hey Auntie, can I ask you something? I stared at the screen, debating whether to reply. Eventually, I responded. Of course, what's on your mind? His reply came quickly. I keep reflecting on today. My stomach fluttered, unsure how to interpret his words. I responded neutrally. I was just trying on some old clothes. Jason replied almost immediately. You looked nice. I mean it. I stared at the screen, pulse racing. Was this just a benign compliment? After a pause, I typed, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. I hoped that would end the exchange, but I sensed it might not. The following morning, as I sipped coffee, a knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting visitors. Upon opening the door, Jason stood there, hands in his pockets, appearing more serious than usual. Jason? What are you doing here so early? He stepped inside. I was nearby and thought I'd drop by. Jason didn't live close by, but I chose not to question it further. As we settled into casual conversation, I reminded myself to tread carefully, focusing on the familial bond we shared. Ultimately, I knew maintaining clear boundaries was essential for preserving our relationship and avoiding misunderstanding. I closed the door, confronting him indirectly as I followed him into the living room. He was seated on the couch, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension. Is everything all right? I asked, sitting down. He looked up, his eyes searching mine, before speaking. About last night. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I exhaled, relieved that he was acknowledging the issue. It's acceptable, Jason. Let's just forget about it. But he shook his head. I can't just forget it. It's not that simple. My heart tightened. His words had cut through the air, and I was caught off guard. This wasn't how families should speak to one another. I tried to tread carefully. I think you're mistaken. Your feelings, they're just illusions. This isn't what you think it is. His tone was firm but not confrontational. I know it may seem like that, but I can't ignore these feelings anymore. I've tried. My pulse quickened. I was at a loss. How did we end up here? How could things have spiraled so far? This isn't right, Jason. You're my nephew, this is wrong. He looked down, nodding slowly. I know. I understand. But I couldn't keep it to myself. Pretending these feelings don't exist was tormenting me. The room fell silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, discomfort, and a sense of dread. I wasn't sure how to handle this or if there was even a way to fix it. Finally, I stood up, needing space. Jason, I think you should leave. We both need time to think about this. He stood too, his face full of regret and longing. All right, but this isn't the last time we'll talk about this. He left quietly. And as the door closed behind him, a wave of relief washed over me, though it was tinged with anxiety. The room felt strangely empty, and I noticed an envelope on the floor near the door. My heart skipped a beat before I even picked it up. I opened it with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakably Jason's, neat, deliberate. It read, Auntie, I know you asked me to leave. And I respect that, but I can't pretend these feelings don't exist. I'm not asking for anything, I just need you to understand. If you want me to stay away, I'll respect your wishes. But if there's even the slightest chance of something more, I need to know. I'll be waiting for your response. I felt a jolt in my chest. I wasn't sure how to react, anger, fear, confusion, it all mixed together. Was he serious? Could he truly feel this way? My hands shook as I folded the paper and tucked it away in a drawer, out of sight but far from my mind. I promised myself I wouldn't engage. Ignoring him felt like the right choice. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. It was Jason. I understand you said I shouldn't disturb you, but I need to know if you got my message. I stared at the screen for a moment, the weight of the situation heavy on me. I replied, yes. I received it. But Jason, this has to stop. His reply was immediate. I will stop if you want me to. But please tell me, do you feel anything for me, even a little? I hesitated. Fingers hovering over the keyboard. Denying it would feel false, but admitting it could make things worse. I typed, "You're my nephew." That's all I can say. The next morning, I tried to focus on work, hoping it would offer some distraction from the turmoil in my personal life. But as I sat at my desk, something felt wrong. I had the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. I looked up, and there he was, Jason, standing just outside the window. His hands were in his pockets. His expression torn between resolve and uncertainty. What was he doing here? I rushed outside, trying to keep my voice steady. Jason, what are you doing here? I needed to see you. He said quietly. You didn't respond to me last night. Jason, I've told you. This isn't healthy. We can't keep having these conversations. He took a step closer. You didn't refute it last night. You didn't say there was nothing between us. I took a step back, my hand gripping the strap of my bag. This isn't about feelings, Jason. This is about right and wrong. This is not acceptable. He ran a hand through his hair, his face full of conflict. I know it's wrong. I keep telling myself that. But I can't control my feelings. His words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I had no response. As I turned to walk away, he reached out, gently gripping my arm. I froze, looking at his hand, then up into his eyes. There was something raw in his gaze, something vulnerable that made it hard to just walk away. I'm not trying to ruin your life, he said softly. I just need to know, if there's even a chance. If not, I'll leave and you'll never have to see me again. His words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. Severing all connections caused my heart to throb, yet I knew that perpetuating this situation would only result in further anguish for both Jason and myself. Jason, I said, my voice quivering. Your family. This is all that it can ever be. He affirmed with a nod, and gradually his shoulders drooped as he stepped back. All right, I comprehend. I will refrain from interfering. As I watched him walk away, I experienced an unusual blend of relief and sorrow, believing this marked the conclusion and that we could finally progress. However, later that evening, I received a call that disrupted everything. Jason had been involved in an accident. The call came late in the evening as I was preparing to retire for the night. My phone vibrated persistently on the coffee table, and when I saw Jason's name illuminate the screen, my stomach sank. But it wasn't Jason on the line. A woman's voice from Mercy General said, "Your nephew has been in an accident. He's requested your presence." Panic surged within me. Without inquiring further, I seized my keys and hurried out the door. Upon arriving at the hospital, my heart raced. I entered the ER through the swinging doors, surveying the room until I spotted him. Jason lay on a bed with a minor laceration on his forehead and his arm in a sling. He looked up as I approached, his face pale but his eyes retaining their familiar intensity. What happened? I inquired, my voice tinged with concern. He offered a faint smile. It was really just a small collision. Jason, I said, irritation in my voice. You caused me so much concern. He chuckled gently, then grimaced and clutched his side. I apologize. I wasn't sure who else to contact. I exhaled audibly, positioning a chair near his bed. I'm here now. Are you okay? He nodded, his demeanor softening. Yes. But there is something I must convey to you. Jason, now is not the time, I said, though his voice calmed despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I didn't contact you just because of the accident. I reached out because I realized something. I was perplexed, uncertain where this was going. What are you talking about? He gazed at his hands, nervously manipulating the edge of the hospital blanket. When I thought about the possibility of not surviving, I realized how deep my affection is and how many mistakes I've made. I didn't want to lose you. Jason, I started, but he raised a hand to stop me. Please, let me say this. I know I've crossed boundaries, and I loathe myself for it. But this isn't a fleeting sentiment. I have deeper affection for you than anyone else, and I know it's wrong. I can't resist it. His words lingered, heavy and unrefined. I was at a loss for words. A part of me wanted to console him, to assure him everything would be fine. But another part of me recognized this wasn't something I could remedy with kind words. Before I could respond, a nurse entered the room. Visiting hours are over, she said with a polite but firm smile. I rose, feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. Get some rest, Jason. We'll talk about this later. He nodded, maintaining eye contact as I left. As I drove home, his words replayed in my mind. I believed I had made the right decision by leaving, but upon my return, I encountered something that made me reevaluate everything. The house felt unnervingly silent as I pulled into the driveway. Upon entering, I removed my shoes and noticed a small package on the kitchen table, addressed to me in Jason's handwriting. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter and a small photo album. The letter began. Auntie, I know you requested I cease communication, but I must explain everything, even if this is our final conversation. Please read this and look at the album. If you still wish for my absence, I will honor your wishes. I unfolded the letter fully, my eyes scanning the text. From the moment I returned here, I sensed a change in our dynamic. Initially, I thought it was just respect or admiration, but it became clear it was something more. I've tried to resist it, but I can't. You've supported me more than anyone else. I don't take that for granted. My pulse raced. The weight of his words was overwhelming. I continued reading. I put together this album to remind myself of everything I love about you. Not in a way that crosses lines, but as a way to process my feelings. You'll find photos of us at family gatherings, holiday dinners, and moments you didn't even know I captured. I'm sharing this because I don't want to keep secrets anymore. I'll respect whatever decision you make. I set the letter down and opened the album. The photos were familiar. Family barbecues, dinners, and random snapshots. Each one had a small note in Jason's handwriting, highlighting details he appreciated. Tears welled up. It was touching and unsettling. Jason wasn't just expressing infatuation, he was baring his heart. My phone buzzed. Jason's message inquired if I received the package. He requested confirmation and said if I wanted him gone, he'd leave by tomorrow. I contemplated for a long time. Eventually, I responded, asking Jason to visit the next day for a discussion. He arrived punctually, both anxious and hopeful. Jason, I began, I read the letter and album. I recognize the effort you put into it. But we must establish boundaries. You're family, and that's where my feelings remain. I believe your emotions stem from gratitude, and that's okay. But we can't let this harm us. He nodded, his expression softening. I understand. I'll try to move on. You won't lose me, Jason. But you need to work through this, maybe with help. He agreed. Over time, our relationship returned to something close to normal. The experience taught us both about boundaries, love, and family.